kick us off and turn it over to David. Welcome to your work session.
Good afternoon, everybody. All righty. Let's see, the first thing I'll do is talk about some upcoming events, and just to remind everybody around the table that our next budget work sessions are scheduled for next Thursday, August 24th, and next Friday, August 25th, both beginning at 10 a.m. And next, I'm going to call on Renee Tejas, our Chief Communications Officer, to recognize a couple groups. Renee.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This summer, the Communications and Public Engagement staff, along with many departmental PIOs, had a presence at and attended the Texas Municipal Information Officers Conference, or TAMIO. TAMIO is an affiliate of the Texas Municipal League, representing 98% of Texas urban populations through its more than 1,150 member cities. Our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department entered the DE&I Outreach Campaign category, and the nomination of work focused on their CDFI-friendly Fort Worth initiative. CDFIs are community development financial institutions that specialize in providing flexible, affordable financing and support to small business owners, affordable housing developers, nonprofits, consumers, and commercial real estate, all in historically underserved communities. Fort Worth's initiative has become a beacon of hope and progress for our minority entrepreneurs. The initiative launched was firmly centered on community engagement with grassroots efforts taking place in government, business, nonprofits, and neighborhoods. How our DE&I department engaged and communicated and generated excitement about the program garnered the department, the city of Fort Worth, the Award of Honor from the TAMIO organization in the communication planning category. And today we recognize their winning efforts. I understand the department leadership is at a professional development opportunity, but helping to accept this award is their ACM, Fernando Acosta.
Happy to accept on behalf of Diversity and Inclusion, Christina Brooks and Glenn Forbes, who is the CEO for CDFI Friendly Fort Worth, are both scheduled to brief the council at your next work session on August 29th about CDFI Friendly Fort Worth. It's a great success story. You'll be happy to hear the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fernando. Renee, you got another one, don't you?
I do, yes.
Okay.
I do not need to boast about the service provided to our residents through the call center, from reporting not picked up recycling to informing about a loose dog to navigating city processes. A small but mighty team facilitates more than 25,000 calls a month. I think we'd all agree that the best place for our call center reps to be spending their time is taking calls, not filling out complex timesheets or reporting. The leadership team sought ways to enhance efficiency and productivity at the call center by seamlessly integrating NICE, the call center software, with our HR software, which is called PeopleSoft. Now NICE speaks to PeopleSoft to capture logins and logouts, breaks and lunches to appropriately route the seemingly endless calls from our residents. We nominated the solution to NICE, showcasing 416 hours saved annually and highlighting how supervisors save time when checking hourly timesheets by 67%, and noting the call center now performs at 96% scheduled adherence to not missing routed calls due to having performing other tasks. Large industry call centers use NICE, and our team's nomination was up against those larger call centers such as Hyatt, Walmart, Pfizer, and even Globe Life. However, because they were able to articulate how they eliminated timesheet errors and unlock substantial time savings and provide continual exceptional customer service, our call center received the prestigious NICE 2003 Excellence Trailblazer of the Year Award. Please help me in congratulating our call center administrator. Joining me here is Sharon Gamble, and her leadership team sitting in the back there received this NICE award. Can have you guys stand up in the back there.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Renee. Next up are informal reports. And the first one is our monthly development activity report. And DJ Harrell is available if there are any questions. All right. Next up is an informal report on proposed preparation of Americans with Disabilities Act compliance plan. And Fernando Costa is available if there's any questions. We're rolling. Third informal report is on door-to-door vendors. And Janie Scarlett Morales is available if there are any questions.
I have a couple.
All right, come on up.
Good afternoon. An overview will do for me because I'm very irritated with these people. So what can you tell us?
About the process?
Yeah.
Very good.
Well, I know how to tell them to leave me alone.
Something tells me you don't have any
Yep.
trouble with that, Gina. But on behalf of your constituents, we can figure out how else people can do it.
The process is managed by the Development Services, and the ordinance does require for a registration. The registration is valid for 6 months, and we take the applications in person, via online, and via my Fort Worth CRM system. We review those applications. They are required to provide some information to us that includes their name, the name of the entity. They also need to provide us information on the vehicle that they will be utilizing. They also have restrictions as to when they can operate. They can operate normally under Central Time from 9 p.m. to 7, from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., and during daylight savings times all the way to 8 p.m. This same restrictions apply to the actual solicitation as well as to the posting and distributing of handbills. So it's the same time distribution requirement and that they must adhere to. That's how we administer it here in Fort Worth, and the enforcement is done by our police department. We were asked also to provide an update on how other municipalities handle their door-to-door programs, and they're very similar. We actually contacted a total of 9 different cities in Texas, and all but 9 have some enforcements and requirement registration. Provided that as a part of the informal report. With the exception of Austin, all the other municipalities have very similar regulations that the city of Fort Worth has. The breakdown that I provided was on the registration requirement. 9 of the cities require registrations. As far as regulations dealing with the time, the day that they can operate, for example, Fort Worth only has a limitation as to the time that they can operate, but other organizations have the time of the days. For example, they cannot operate on Sundays or they cannot operate on certain holidays. Another regulations that is required that they have to comply with is 6 of the municipalities are required to do criminal background checks, and 7 of the municipalities have fees, and 5 of the municipalities have a fine of up to $500 for each occurrence, as well as the city of Fort Worth. Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for putting this together. The reason I asked for it is because I was getting an increased number of calls from constituents complaining about aggressive salesmen at later times in the evening. Based on some of those emails, I do think that it would be beneficial to maybe work with our NPOs to try to combat some of these late night folks, or I don't want to take a lot of resources off of it. But I do think some sort of maybe brief enforcement would be helpful. Some things that I would like us to explore changing in our policy is, one, the fee for registration. It looks like all of our major counterparts have some sort of fee for registration. I think that will help us administer the program a little better. It also makes sure that we have more credible businesses coming in. criminal background checks, do you know if the cities that require that, if the cities conduct those criminal background checks, or the companies that are applying for these permits are required to submit criminal background checks for their employees?
The ones that I reviewed indicated that they would go through the municipalities and do the background checks,
So that,
and they have to pay for those background checks as well,
okay.
in some instances.
How onerous are these background checks? Do we know? No. Okay, so I think that we are behind the ball on background checks of folks that we're allowing to come knock on folks' doors. So I'd like to see that changed. I'd like to see the fee for registration changed, but I would also like some sort of requirement that as part of, and I think this is why a fee would be helpful, is that there is some sort of document, like whether it's a badge, a lanyard, that these folks are required to wear so that our residents can easily see that they have registered with the city, so they know that there's a background check. They know that it provides some sort of credibility to that and safety to the person answering the door. So that's my charge on what I'd like to see changed in our current policy.
Charlie?
Okay, so first, I don't think you're gonna find anybody more pro-business than me. However, I mean, the fee, yeah, I agree, okay, 411 projected applications, even at $10, the marine math, $4,100. I'd rather the city pay them $4,100 to not knock on doors, right? I mean, these are a home. I think if we're gonna keep saying, you know, we want a safe city, absolutely, the criminal check is, I think that's way behind due. But even looking beyond that, like, these are our neighborhoods. And, I mean, I don't know if we can just not allow it at all, but I don't think anyone says, oh, look, I'm so glad someone's at my door to sell me some solar panels, right? Like, I don't think anyone's looking forward to it. And especially my biggest concern too is with our elderly population who then gets pressured into buying something they don't want. And how many times has that happened? I'm sure a lot. I mean, even my district director, who's a young buck, you know, it feels like he may have gotten pressured into high-pressure salesmen for solar panels. So I know it's happening to everyone. So I'd like to see any other large cities who have a zero tolerance policy on this, because again, really going back to the safe city mantra, this is, I don't think it's good for anybody except for those businesses, which I don't think it's going to be good for us. And the level of those checks, I also have major concerns with. Just knowing that, like, even you have the national agency checks and local checks, and I'm sure in these cases it's just a cheap local check. You know, like somebody would run on a tenant for a rental property. It's not very in-depth at all. And quite frankly, a lot of these are young salesmen door to door. So a lot of them are going to come back safe, but are they really? So I do have a lot of concerns with just the whole program in general and whether or not we can just not allow it or what our options are, because there's not a lot of money in it for the city. So that's just my take.
I've got one more thing to add, Mayor.
Go ahead, Gina.
When I left Encore, I destroyed all of my shirts that had the Encore logo because of the safety concerns we had from people pretending to be utility workers. And so I like the idea Elizabeth has for some type of ID. I think if you have a fee that's stiff enough, you know, that will be a deterrent for the companies to make sure they're putting the right people out. Usually what I just do is talk real ugly to them. And I won't be specific, but it tends to work. But I do have a non-solicitation sticker on my storm door right there at eye level. And when they come, I point to that and they push on. And then I point to that with another finger and they'll leave. But, you know, I like the idea, of ID. Yeah, well, you know. So, but I don't like the hours, and that's the issue I have. You're disturbing my dinner hour if I had a traditional family. And I think if we were to take this very seriously, we might get some type of, you know, conformity, you know, with this. So I hope staff isn't just taking this as us griping. This is pretty important.
Any clarity needed from staff? We're good? Okay. Any other questions? Jeanette?
So I like the idea of a fee and ID as well, and maybe with some of the money that we bring in with the fees, we could buy stickers and have NPO or code hand those out at community events. No soliciting stickers.
Any other questions? Thank you, David. Go ahead.
Our next informal report is on the Texas Enterprise Zone nomination for Gulfstream Aerospace, and Robert Stearns is available if there are any questions.
I have no questions, but Robert, I'd ask if you can come up there because I think it's very noteworthy. We have the nomination of Gulfstream Aerospace for the Texas Enterprise Zoned, program. I think that's a tremendous benefit, possibly.
Sure. Thank you, Councilman Flores. Again, Robert Stearns, Economic Development. So if you'll recall, we mentioned in the IR that back in October, Gulfstream announced the opening of their newest MRO maintenance, repair, and operations facility at Alliance Airport. They invested $55 million in a 160,000 square foot facility. They have approximately 200 people that are working at that facility today. So as they have opened that new facility, they have decided to expand, additional expansion here in Fort Worth at 2500 Golden Triangle Boulevard. This will be about 100,000 square feet facility, which would employ an additional 105 workers. And they're going to invest another $6 million in the project, particularly on purchasing tooling to facilitate the work that's being done there. The nomination for the Texas Enterprise Zone, again, that is no impact to the city's dollars. This is a state designation, a competitive designation. So it has to be submitted by the city, goes down to the state. So we're trying to get this in by the September 1st deadline so they can be considered. And hopefully they would end up getting a sales and tax refund for a 5-year period as part of this project. I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, me too. And I'll also add that they committed to hiring, economically disadvantaged folks. And I think that's very noteworthy.
Correct.
Thanks, Robert.
Thank you, Robert.
Next informal report is on the Will Rogers Memorial Coliseum and the final design of the plaques describing the historic tile mural. Michael Crum, our Public Events Director, and Estrus Tucker, the Chair of the Fort Worth Arts Commission, are available if you have any questions.
I have a couple questions.
Come on up, guys.
Sorry, Mike.
For the record, please note that I gave Mr. Tucker the skinny podium this afternoon. Hi, I'm Mike Crum. I'm the Director of the Public Events Department.
My name is Estrus Tucker. I chair the Public Arts Commission.
Thank you. Really, it's just questions on timing. I know we have $65 million in active projects going on at Will Rogers. The majority are going to start during the timeframe of this installation. I just want us to be cognizant on when these are going to be delivered, installed, and then we're going to have all this new renovation and construction going on. What's the plan to protect the plaques? Are we going to work with Fort Worth Events to make sure that we're on timing, not having to pull things up and redo them?
Sure. So we're here today as a final check-in on the plaque project. From here, we would secure a vendor, negotiate an agreement, and start with fabrication. As we all know, nothing happens at the Will Rogers Memorial Center during the stock show. And so we would anticipate that this project would be actually installed sometime in 2024, probably in the second or third quarter of next year.
I guess my question is more about the timing of the construction. I know we have lots of different projects going to be going on. That's what I'm more worried about than the
Yeah, so the construction projects that we're looking at don't need the front plaza of the complex to be staged. We'll stage construction work from the Will Rogers Coliseum side of the building, the east side of the building. So the installation of the plaques would be relatively isolated and can take place in sequence. So they can go in one at a time, so we're not digging out the entire plaza in order to do the installation.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure we're not duplicating efforts and spending more money.
We're good.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Estrus, thank you as usual.
you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Next informal report is an update on the fiscal year 2024 proposed budgets for operating PIDs and the tourism PID. And I know there's somebody here to talk about that.
Any questions? Alan?
Is Crystal here?
There we go.
So I want to say thank you, Crystal, for all the hard work, and Robert, for putting all the PID budgets together. Councilman Lauersdorf and I had the pleasure of being together at the PID 7 annual meeting last night, and we received a question about the PILOs, the payment in lieu of service. And the concern from the residents was strictly related to the sense that we're increasing mowing as a service by the city. Inflation's occurred, yet that number doesn't seem to be trending in the same direction. So if you could take a moment and talk to that and maybe let us know what the plan is.
Yes, Councilmember, I did email you back on that, and I CC'd Tenzing, Sherpa, Sandra Youngblood, and her team at the Parks Department, because they could provide probably just a little bit more detail. And from the email chain, they have proposed the same allocation for FY, that they gave in FY '23 as a decision package in FY '24, and I think that's pending approval. So you'll essentially get the same allocation in FY '23 if it's approved. Now they're proposing a plan to the budget office for FY '25 and beyond at a % year-over-year increase. And I think Tenzing and Sandra emailed this afternoon on the status of that. Right, from the email that I recall, it's a decision package. And so how that works is it's going to be on next fiscal year's agenda for discussion and approval. But as far as the rate increase year over year, I think it was 1% to 2% year over year. And those conversations, I've updated the board and the management companies from PARD's communication to me. And so I kind of rely on PARD to give those status updates as they get them. But that is what I know of 25 and beyond.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay.
It helps. If we can accelerate maybe to mid-year, that would be even better.
Yes, and I'll give you an update on the approval of FY '24 appropriations, at mid-year.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the final informal report is on zoning notifications for continued cases, and Stephen Murray is available if there are any questions. No questions? Mayor, that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, David. Our next item is any questions regarding changes in membership on boards of commissions for the August 22nd council meeting? Any questions regarding the M&C log? Moving right along, our first presentation is Affordable Housing and Neighborhood Conservation Plans. I believe that Victor Turner, Neighborhood Services Director, and Scott Page with Interface Studios is going to present today.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. We're here today to give you all a briefing on our neighborhood conservation plan and housing affordability strategy. Back in 2019 at the council retreat, the focus was on neighborhood conservation. And there was a desire by council for us to develop a plan of how we could attack some of the neighborhoods that were on the verge of distress, those at risk, those that were already challenged, and come up with strategies and recommendations to raise all boats. And so COVID came, and so 2020, 2021, we wrestled with that. But in July of '22, we executed a contract with Interface Studio, Scott Page, and also with Kevin Hively and Ninegret Partners to develop a neighborhood conservation plan. So what we have is two plans in one. So we couldn't really address the conditions of neighborhoods without talking about housing. So we have a housing affordability strategy, neighborhood conservation plan, so two plans in one. So just to kind of speed up the process a little bit, they have over 40 strategies or recommendations in the two plans. Some of them are higher priorities than others. We have already started to attack some of those areas that they have raised as issues. One is preserving existing affordable housing in the upcoming budget recommendation to increase our priority repair program. Also partner with an agency or entity for a community land trust. Also some funding in there to address our homelessness issue. So we've already kind of started that process with that roadmap that's been provided by the plan that Scott and Kevin have put together. So today they're going to go through that plan and give you all a snapshot of what they think we should be doing as a city to address this. Scott Page.
All right. Good afternoon. It's good to see a number of you again, particularly those that have been involved in this process. Just a couple of words about this work. It is comprehensive. That was the intent, to think about and look at affordable housing and housing overall across the board throughout the city, and really think through the number of strategies that are necessary. It's data-driven, so that is also a priority of this work. And it's built on partnerships here in Fort Worth to really tackle the unique challenges and strengths that you have as a city. So that's just a little preface of where this work comes from, and I appreciate the introduction, Victor. Thank you. We've been at this for about a year. It started early on with some work looking at the neighborhood improvement program specifically and ways to fine-tune that very successful program that Neighborhood Services and their partners have been implementing to tackle conditions across different neighborhoods in Fort Worth. We since that time then launched into this work around housing affordability in neighborhoods. So what I'd like to do is just provide a quick overview, and special thanks certainly to the Neighborhood Quality and Revitalization Committee, who have now seen some version of this presentation a few times, as we talked through the data and tried to get our heads around the range of things that would be appropriate and supported here in Fort Worth. So a few big reasons to really focus on housing. In particular, I'll be talking about the housing affordability strategy first. Obviously, Fort Worth is growing. It's growing to the point where it's also growing faster in jobs than in housing, which means that puts more and more pressure on the housing market. But no surprise to anybody. With all of that growth, we have some increasing housing prices across the board. These are charts that we have shared before, but the long and short of it is the median income family within Fort Worth cannot afford the median priced home. There are a lot fewer homes that are priced at below $200,000 than there were even 10 years ago, where you could find quite a supply of those homes across the city. Some communities are already starting to see some level of displacement because of that constraint on the housing supply. So can't find a house, you just moved to Fort Worth, you might look at a neighborhood where the prices are a little less expensive. You pick up that house and slowly those prices begin to rise. So some of that displacement, we did some mapping here that demonstrated places within Fort Worth that are either seeing some rates of displacement or at risk of seeing some displacement. And I don't think it would be a surprise to anyone here that some of those neighborhoods that are seeing that activity most frequently are neighborhoods that are primarily Hispanic and Black. So the issue of displacement is, of course, an issue that needs to be addressed in the context of housing and housing affordability. And then with respect to homelessness counts have been rising. This is a national issue that doesn't diminish the fact that each city has to tackle this challenge on their own terms and figure out what exactly is necessary to start to address some of the challenges that we've seen in the past few years. So homelessness is very much a part of this strategy as well. Now, one of the things that we have emphasized from day one is that if you look at raw numbers, it's too much of a blanket to begin to address on its own. If you just look at the numbers of Fort Worth and you say how many folks are spending too much of their income on housing, it's about 109,000 households. That is not a problem we are going to address, nor is it a problem we need to address because some of those households are actually upper income households who just bought too much house. That's their problem. We have other concerns that we really need to focus on within this strategy. So we broke it down into a number of different categories. There are folks who are lower income, who own their home, who might need a little bit of help to stay in their home so that they don't lose that resource, which is affordable and provides a place for them to stay. There are, of course, very low-income renters who would qualify for subsidized housing, but they don't currently or can't currently access the resources that are available just because of the limitations of the resources that we get from HUD. So we break this into a number of different categories, which helps us to then identify a number of clear goals. Goals that this plan is based around, and that's what the actions are really targeted to. So there's goal one is about low-income, cost-burdened homeowners. There's about 23,000 folks in households within Fort Worth that pay too much for their housing, but they own their home. So there are some tools and strategies, a lot of which you already employ, that can help them stay in their home. And that's part of what this plan is focused on. There's a goal around the subsidized rental units you do have. There are about 21,000 households that have housing. They pay exactly 30% of their income for that housing, whatever their income is. We want to make sure that we retain that housing and not lose any of it. That means reinvesting in tax credits when that time is up, and looking at all of the other tools that you already use and making sure we're not losing any of the resources that we have. There's opportunities to look at for some of the low-income cost-burden renters that may be at the cusp of buying a house but just need a little help. That is an opportunity. And then there's a number of very low-income cost-burden renters, about 19,000, that we'd be looking to preserve housing, build housing. This all becomes part of the overall strategy. Similarly, with respect to homelessness, we really needed to target this work. Target it to families with children. We know that housing instability, which causes kids to move frequently, diminishes their school performance. And that is a real concern for us, and it's a concern for the school district and everyone involved in education. So that should be a priority when we're thinking about how to address those on the cusp or unhoused that have kids. And then there's the other kinds of homelessness. There's the intermittent kind. I just had a crisis. I've lost my home. Let's try to reduce the number of days that you are unhoused. That becomes part of the goal of this work. And then there are a number of chronically homeless individuals, folks that have been on the street for a very long time. Many of them need medication or additional assistance. There's about 300. And that becomes a goal to really look at finding ways to provide permanent supportive housing for them. So I wanted to spend a little time on these goals just to give you a framework for how all of this is put together. And I'll go through this strategy now a little more quickly, just to give you a sense of what's here. This is what you all currently do. This is what is allocated, program goals, Fort Worth Housing Assistance, and you can see how many households you are able to impact in a given year, in addition to what Tarrant County adds to that number. Now, this is all based on the resources that HUD provides you all. So we were just talking about problems in the thousands. You can see that the good work that the city does based upon the limitations of federal resources is hitting about 1,000 total. So it's a question of resources, and that is something that we're really focused on. How do we extend and maximize the resources you do have and make the most of the money that's available to you? So we have to do that by attacking a few different costs. And we really do look at it through the lens of how do we do this most effectively. We have to attack the cost of building and preserving housing. If you're already in a home, whether you're renting or owning, we have to make sure that we're attacking the cost of what that occupancy is. And then we need to certainly intervene and manage in the housing crisis for those that are on the verge of homelessness for any number of reasons. So there's a lot on these slides. I'm just going to pick out a couple things. When you look at things like the cost of building and preserving housing, there's a number of things that play into this, right? There's the cost of land, there's the cost of construction, cost of capital, all of those things matter. And there's actually programs that we can identify and have identified as a part of this process to help reduce those costs or expand our effort to make the most of the dollars we're spending. So, for instance, under land, one of the things we are recommending is a land bank. I know this is something that's been discussed, but one of the most effective strategies that cities have to create and preserve affordable housing is to have the land available when they have the funds available to build housing. So that becomes a really critical component of the strategy. Under the cost of capital, we are thinking that we need flexible local dollars to extend the benefit of the federal dollars that you're getting and frankly are limited and diminish every few years. So the more that we invest as a city, we're suggesting $100 million as an investment from a number of different sources to be determined by city leadership, would go directly into addressing a number of these challenges. And then one of the things that will help the most is to actually invest in community capacity. So community development corporations, organizations on the ground that can make so much of a difference with a bit of public investment. And the good example here is what's happening in LVT. LVT Rise is a really successful organization that's able to build upon and expand what the city is investing in that community. With respect to occupying a home, so what are the costs when you're occupying a home? It's things like taxes, utilities, the cost of the unit. There are a number of strategies here that the plan identifies that look at things like, we know the state's just passed some changes on the income tax and the, property tax. But certainly expanding city rehabilitation programs is a really critical opportunity and resource and something Victor's already mentioned. As well as looking at a community land trust, which is sort of a land bank, but with an additional layer of partnership and ownership that helps to provide affordable housing over time. So it does not terminate at some point 15, 20 years down the road. It's a resource that can be there for cities across generations. We have also talked a little bit about some opportunities with respect to zoning and making sure where we're looking to build or preserve housing makes sense with respect to where transit's located, how do we get to work. All of these things are, of course, critical when we're thinking about housing. And then with respect to homelessness, there's a number of key opportunities here. Expanding things like the eviction diversion program, that's critical and really, really helpful. If we can keep people in their homes, they don't end up on the street requiring other services, which becomes a real cost. And certainly a really centerpiece of trauma for those families and those that are dealing with those kinds of challenges. But even expanding permanent supportive housing, we've identified a couple ways within this plan and the way that other cities have done this, particularly by working closely with hospitals and Medicare and Medicaid programs to actually invest in those programs because it is a cost benefit to them. And that's something that we can talk about in more detail. With an investment of about $100 million over the next 5 years, you'd see a number of benefits. Beyond addressing a lot of the challenges that we're discussing, it brings an outside investment. It improves all of these neighborhoods in the way that I think was the direction for this work to begin with. It builds upon programs like the Neighborhood Improvement Program. It brings other partners to the table, and that's been part of this process, not just talking with all of you, but also talking with those that are involved in all aspects of housing development, preservation, to make sure that we're all working towards the same goals. So the benefits are really clear for us, and we think it also reinforces the Full Strength Fort Worth, which is the plan you all have adopted. Implementation in Full Strength Fort Worth is direct implementation towards the work that we're discussing here with the housing affordability strategy. So that's one component of the work. The other component, I'll go a little faster, which is the neighborhood conservation plan. And as Victor said, these are really two plans in one. We're going to talk about the health and vibrancy of neighborhoods across Fort Worth. We can't do that without talking about housing. So we spent a lot of time talking about the needs of housing. But of course, Fort Worth's neighborhoods have a wide range of conditions. One of the things we have provided in this data-driven approach is a way to measure these neighborhoods and group them in categories so that we understand the kinds of challenges different neighborhoods are up against. Some neighborhoods have a lot more vacancy and need different types of strategies than neighborhoods that are pretty stable, but maybe have different kinds of needs, whether it's around fixing their streets or a little code enforcement. So part of this is to try to provide some tools that can map a range of ideas and investments onto the neighborhoods in Fort Worth and really recognize where they are in the process. I don't need to go through each of these, but essentially all of these categories all have a number of data points that define those categories This is a simple process to do, and this is one of these data points that we would say, measure this every year and see how the neighborhoods are doing, particularly the neighborhoods where you're investing. Is it having the impact that you all want it to have? So yeah, there's distressed and challenged neighborhoods. They have a number of data points that make up those areas. There's influx and steady neighborhoods, which are more of your middle market neighborhoods. And then, of course, there's neighborhoods in Fort Worth that are doing even better. They're stable or thriving. The market is strong. The property conditions are strong. So it's important for us to understand these statistics so that we, again, can begin to measure progress and success. And what the neighborhood plan does is it provides two tools. One is a checklist, and one is a series of strategies. The checklist itself is really intended to help measure a number of different things. What makes a neighborhood great to live in? What has some level of capacity and neighbors that know each other and are willing to take action? There's investment, and then, of course, there's maintenance. And for us, the checklist is really just a way of saying, look, even two neighborhoods in the same category as we've measured it, two neighborhoods that are, say, steady or in flux, may have very different components to them. You all have invested in community centers. That's a great investment that has really impacted some neighborhoods. So if we're looking at neighborhoods like that do not have community investments like that, or a community center, then that's an opportunity. So what the checklist does is really looks at the range of things that we'd be looking at with respect to city investment and activity as a way of starting to fine-tune where this work is going. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but this is really a tool for those city staff and those on the ground to help understand what is it that my neighborhood may need and what's going to be most effective, just as a beginning point in the conversation. We then would move into, we have a number of strategies with respect to neighborhood conservation, and I can't emphasize enough how important all of the housing affordability strategies I just mentioned are embedded in all of this. But we are looking at a number of things, whether it's about greening, a citywide parks initiative, particularly thinking about heat and shade in low-income neighborhoods, devoting infrastructure dollars to underinvested areas. This is something NIP is doing. So again, this is recognizing the fact that you all are making these kinds of very important investments. But also looking at things like data, prioritizing a list of vacant properties, street cleaning and bulk trash pickup strategies. There are some things that some cities have tried that are really, really helpful, even though they sound very, very simple. Some of that is even what's called a trash amnesty day for neighbors to get rid of anything that they need to. And the city works with those neighborhood groups to basically bring in dumpsters to remove trash. So it's one of those smaller things that we could look at as opportunities. So if we're talking about concerns around trash or illegal dumping, this becomes one way of thinking about how to address it. And then finally, around capacity, I mentioned the need to invest in community development corporations, to train resident leaders. I know that a whole bunch of staff gets similar calls all the time from folks in neighborhoods about how do I do this or how do I make this improvement. We could also think about creating some resource guides that would help to address and address those questions and provide information proactively, which again would help to enable more people on the ground to take action and partner with the city, which I think is what everyone is looking for. So with that, I will stop. I wanted to make sure I provided enough of an overview of everything that's in the document. There's the two plans, and then there's also at the end of those plans an appendix full of data, which provides all of the background that helped to shape the maps, the analysis, and much of the strategies that have come out of that process. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Mayor Pro Tem Bivens? Okay. Any questions? No? My question might be for Victor. In our conversations in this budget, I know we're adding an additional neighborhood in our neighborhood strategy. Based on the planning you've gone through here, do you anticipate a change in your focus? Can you talk about that just a minute if it's appropriate during this presentation?
No, we adjusted the priorities and the criteria for scoring just last year. We will include additional neighborhoods that may have been recommended by council to do an analysis. But we fine-tuned the scoring. I think it's at a good place right now. So I think it's consistent with what's in the plan and what you all have desired.
Okay, thank you. And then in your measurement for, or in recommendations, this is more throughout the presentation, I'll give you an example so you can follow me a little bit. On these last few slides, when you discussed maintenance and neighborhood conservation, do you keep track here in how we're doing already in some of these categories and the efforts we've made, especially since last budget? Or are these just blanket recommendations that you know work in communities and we can kind of decipher the things that we're already working on together here?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is both.
Okay.
So those strategies come directly from discussions with folks that are on the front lines doing those things in Fort Worth and some of the changes that have been made. But we also know how important that is just globally, and keeping a focus on that issue in particular.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. Carlos.
Just one question, and you can provide a follow-up for it, Victor, if you don't know the answer right now. I would be interested in knowing, in our neighborhoods where we have displacement that is either in progress or at high risk, where are the community development corporations, around the city in council districts?
Yeah, that's one of the areas that we really need to beef up. We only have maybe 2-3 organizations that would fall in that category of what you would call a community development corporation. We have had some interest from 3 or 4 additional organizations that will need to help build their capacity. So in Fort Worth, today I could say there are 2 organizations that are really active in Fort Worth. So there's a lot of room for growth in those distressed neighborhoods that you're talking about.
Okay, and would be looking for guidance from you all to see how we can promote, establishment of those corporations. Thank you.
So, Carlos, to address the corporation issue, in this proposed budget are 3 positions in economic development, and one of those was really at the request of having staff to help foster organizations like that, because it takes so much to get that ball rolling. So hopefully, I'm with you on that I hope we see some more of that. And as we focus, we can look at that map on distressed areas as well. So thank you for bringing that up. I have a question about the specialized code enforcement approach. I'd be interested to hear what that looks like and what your thoughts on how to operate that.
Absolutely. So this actually came out of discussions through the NIP process when we were looking at making some tweaks to the NIP. And one of the things we heard is that in some neighborhoods, they felt that code enforcement was unnecessary for the level of challenges they were under against, right? So as an example, some neighborhoods may have bigger issues than the house next door that's not in the best condition. They're more concerned about the illegal dumping down the street, or maybe some of the issues around crime. And so our feeling is, okay, let's make sure the code enforcement matches the level of need in the community and what the community is looking for. LVT is another good example there, where we have a number of rental properties, multifamily rental properties that were of particular concern. And so the issue there was, okay, well, how do we then target some of the code enforcement to address the concerns of those multifamily properties so that we can alleviate those issues in the neighborhood? So that's really what that's speaking to, is it's never a one-size-fits-all. It's really tailored to the needs.
And then I appreciate all the data that's in here. When you look at renters versus homeowners, do you feel that we're in danger, one group is in greater danger than the other when it comes to, when we talk about affordability? Like, do you see that gap widening for homeowners or renters at a greater rate, or are they about the same?
That's a really good question. I don't know, Kevin, if you have insight on that. I would say that they're both real challenges. They're just different kinds of challenges, right? So if I'm moving to Fort Worth because I have a new job, I'm going to struggle to find a place that matches my income in some cases. And that becomes a problem. So we say, one of the things we talk about in this study is we need new housing at all income levels. So we should be really encouraging development, which would help to alleviate some of those stresses. But for the 19,000 renters we talked about that are very low income, they are very much on the cusp of an eviction away or a job loss away from moving into a different category of challenges, both for them and for the city to help.
Okay. And then when you mentioned eviction programs, are those, when you talk about those, that other, I'm assuming other cities have those.
Yes.
Are they state law, are they county law, are they local ordinances? How are those particular programs enacted in their government structure?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, you already, Tarrant County already has one. It's really a question of providing it with more resources.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Charlie?
I just have one question. So I heard you mention quite a bit about what other cities are doing that's working. And with us going into budget, have you seen what other cities are doing that's not working, that's a waste of money that we may need to consider going forward? You know, maybe reallocating funds to different projects?
I can't think of a very specific instance, but I can say there's been a mistake that I have seen other cities make frequently, which is to spread the resources too thin. And I think part of the opportunity and part of why the strategy is important is to really focus. It's what you do with NIP. It's what the police district does when some of their targeting, when they realize there's a particular issue in a community. That kind of focus is really, really valuable. And I think you see that as the benefit through the NIP program. The question is, as we look at these other resources, we think about rehabilitation or working to alleviate displacement risks, you'd want to take the same kind of focused approach and really think this is something that we need to target so that the resources go as far as possible.
Yeah, I would just add one thing, which is I think, and one of the reasons why I think our plan is different than what you would see in some other places, is a lot of communities try to rely on one solution. So it's either a zoning fix or we'll just throw a bunch of money at it. Whereas we're trying to do things at multiple levels to address all the different costs. And as Scott said, and try not to spread it around. So using the NIP and those metrics to really kind of help focus where that investment needs to go.
Chris?
Thank you. And kind of off of what you guys are saying about not spreading the resources around, I'm looking at your slide where it talks about the distressed and challenged communities versus the stable and thriving communities. And I'm looking at Southeast being one of, well, the main distressed and challenged other than some parts up north. What is, when you talk about resources and the NIP, I know we want to enhance the entire city of Fort Worth, but if we're looking at the map, we see that there's a portion of Fort Worth that really needs more work than others. So how does that look in your program? How does it, are we going to provide more resources to help pull them up to the standard of others, or are we going to try to just keep doing it around the city of Fort Worth?
Yeah, and that's exactly why we created this map, right? It's because these are the discussions that are really necessary. So as an example, in some of those influx neighborhoods and some of the challenged neighborhoods, you actually have a risk of displacement that shows up in a different map. So that would tell me that if there are resources that are looking at anti-displacement or even home rehabilitation or keeping homeowners in their homes, those are the neighborhoods that would benefit most from that kind of investment because that's where it's most needed. There are other neighborhoods that may not be facing those challenges, but say have a number of properties that are empty and would be available for new development and so new development resources might be focused on those communities. So what this helps do is kind of fine tune the problems a little bit to say, okay, one kind of investment doesn't make sense in Southeast as it does in Northeast, right? Like different kinds of investments matter and different kinds of neighborhoods need different things. So that's exactly where this is sort of pointing. And it's very, certainly in the report, we go into some details about the kinds of activities that are best suited for different kinds of neighborhoods to meet them where they are.
Okay, and just a question for Victor, and I know we have 2 neighborhoods coming up this year for the budget. And I know we mentioned that we have council recommendations, but when you're looking at the recommendations also versus what the city as a whole or different neighborhoods need, how do you weigh those 2 out? And what type of neighborhoods will we be looking for this year?
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, council member, we have those metrics already in place. And so the scoring won't vary any, but what I was asking is if you have neighborhoods that we haven't considered in the past, then we'll run them through that analysis and see how they stack up with all the other neighborhoods that we've considered. So it's designed to address the most challenged neighborhoods already. We did have up to like 20-something metrics. We combined those and grouped them into, I believe, reduced it to 9 that incorporated a lot of the things we've looked at in the past. But we picked out those that were, I guess, would most directly impact the neighborhoods and allow us to score it, I guess, more equitably across the board. So, yeah, if there's a neighborhood we hadn't looked at, that's what we're asking for you to submit that to us.
Okay, and question, do we have funds to, so we did a neighborhood, say for instance, Ash Crescent. I think we did that back in 2018. And we invested dollars in. But they have not been able to kind of carry or reach that threshold that we really need them to be at. Do we have money in the budget to enhance those neighborhoods on a continued basis, even though we already did the NIP on that?
Yeah, I think Ash Crescent, the one thing remaining is, I believe it was a park. I believe
Right,
that
the
was
Pilker
left.
Park.
Yeah, and so you saw in the slide, it had neighborhood revitalization strategy areas. So that's one of the things that Scott's team suggested that we could implement. That's usage of community development block grant money to kind of continue to support those neighborhoods. So we do have money aside from neighborhood improvement that
I
could
heard you
be.
say we do have money.
We get money every year from HUD, but
Say
it's
it
a
again,
small
we do
amount.
have money.
We will have money, I'll put it that way.
I'm messing with you.
Yeah, so that's how we continue to invest in those areas, challenged areas.
Okay, thank you.
Macy?
Yes, a quick question on the community land bank. Do you have examples of other cities that have done this, and what does that structure look like? Is it family foundations? Is it private individuals? Is it corporations? How do they go into this structure, and how does that work?
I'll let Scott speak to it. We got two different things that was mentioned up there. The traditional land bank and a community land trust. So those are separate type entities.
Okay.
A lot of times the land banks are run and administered by a city. And that's typically just the accumulation of property that the city holds and makes it available for developers at a lower cost. The land trust is more of a long-term property being held, whether it's for rental or home ownership, that's basically at affordability and almost in perpetuity. And generally nonprofits or another type agency run those.
That's a combination of ownership, correct? The city and nonprofits? That's what I'm trying to understand, the community land trust.
The land, I'll let Scott speak to it, but the land trust generally is a nonprofit or another agency versus the city.
Yeah, exactly. Usually it's an outside organization that takes on the responsibility of managing the property, maintenance, upkeep, all of the things that go with it. So the land bank might be operated by the city, and at some point the land bank may choose to take some of that property and put it into a trust, which is managed by somebody else, which would keep housing affordable in perpetuity. So there's different structures. There are land banks in other cities in Texas and plenty of other cities around the country. And there are some very successful land trusts that provide a good model on how that works. But it's all about getting access to underutilized and empty land. That's really the first step in making those things effective.
I guess my question was about the funding piece. So you mentioned in your presentation philanthropic dollars and the city dollars as well. So
Yes.
what does that structure look like specifically?
And that's usually what that is. So some land banks are entirely publicly funded, which is really just about managing the resources you have. If you have empty land and you're able to get a hold of it, that becomes something that you, the city, can then have more control over, whether you want to sell it for market rate housing or affordable housing or something entirely different. The land trust is usually has outside partners involved with the funding, whether that's philanthropy or private business or both. It's helping to capitalize the trust that enables it to manage the properties and basically expand the trust so that you can get more affordable housing through it.
Do y'all have examples of other cities that have done that?
Yeah, we can certainly send some. Yeah,
That'd be great. Thank you.
I think there's a bunch in the big deck.
Yes.
Gina, did you have something?
Robert, and I just want to say thank you for embracing the idea of a land bank. I know for years that has not not Robert, sorry, Victor, and Robert too. Y'all gonna have to work together on it anyway. But the idea of embracing such is a good thing. My question is, do we have any type of models anywhere where, whether it's a land bank or a land trust, it has been used to bring a grocery store to a food desert?
So this becomes an interesting question because this is actually where CDFI friendly Fort Worth also plays a role. And the piece that's missing is the Community Development Corporation that can actually organize, not to get too wonky, but what's known as the capital stack, which is what your question is, which is what are all the layers of money? And that's kind of a missing piece of trying to organize the money to make that happen on land that maybe the city owns, finance with philanthropic equity investments and some other things where they're not looking for market level returns. They're looking at, they don't want zero, but they also don't need 10%. And that organizing piece is the piece that's missing at the moment.
Well, I know under the leadership of Glenn Forbes, we'll get there, but how do you all keep this council in the loop of that type of discussion? Because there may be assets around the table that could provide help in that conversation.
Victor?
I feel like that's a question for you.
I'm always asking staff to keep us in the loop. There are some things we actually may be able to contribute to that discussion.
Yes, thank you, Councilman Bivens, or Mayor Pro Tem Bivens, sorry. So really, economic development has for the past couple of months been doing some research on what the opportunities look like, what the market looks like for grocers right now, what are some of the challenges and what are the things that we can bring to the table to make some of those things happen and what other communities have done. And so we're not quite ready to bring some of that data forward, but I think once we have a good picture of that, that would be something that we bring forward to the council and have a discussion about how we can advance some of those things. So some of it is land banking, some of it is CDFI, some of it is finding the correct sites, types of sites. And then obviously the thing we've heard, the margins are not zero, but they're about 2 to 3%. And so how do we kind of cover those operating margins to ensure that we can have a successful long-term grocer, not someone that's going to be there for a couple of years and then move out?
Well, let's for sure keep in touch because that's a topic I've been requested to bring to my District 5 leadership meetings. And so the timing of it is really important. Please keep me in that loop of discussion.
Any other questions, council? No? Will you pull the goals back up, Scott?
Yes. This one or this one?
If staff can work over the next few weeks to take these goals and align them with our current FY24 budget recommendations, just to kind of know, this is in the green, we're moving in the right direction, or we're not working on this yet, and we can plan over the next few years, that'd be really helpful. But otherwise, I think great presentation. We appreciate all the hard work. Victor, to you and your team as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're moving along. Our next presentation is a briefing on the 1 Second Collaborative. I think that Assistant Chief Robert Aldridge, Executive Assistant Chief, sorry, Robert, and Regina Williams with United Way, Executive Vice President and Chief Impact Officer is here as well, I think. There she is.
Mayor, council, titles are just titles. Come on, it's okay. One of the greatest tragedies that we have is whenever we respond to incidents where a young person has either been injured or killed due to senseless gunfire. That's one of our highest priorities to try and reduce those incidents around the city. We know we cannot arrest our way out of the problem, and so we need other organizations and other entities to try and help us out in this endeavor. If you guys remember, back in late 2022, we partnered with United Way and the 1 Second Collaborative using ARPA funds. Since that time, they've hit the ground running. They've done quite a few great things. And in light of some of the incidents that occurred July 4th in Como, and some of the other tragedies we had across the city, we thought it was an important time for you guys to get an update of what United Way is doing, where we're going, and kind of what the future holds. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Regina Williams, and she's going to provide us with an update.
Do you want to operate it from there?
Good afternoon. Thank you again for having us. So I'm just going to do just really quick overview because I know that we have some council members who are new, but I also know that our 1 Second Collaborative Director, Sam Varner, has scheduled meetings with several of you, and he's making his rounds to do individual meet and greet. So I'll just spend just a little bit of time here, but we'll also leave it open for questions if there's anything that I sped through too quickly. So as we know, with the 1 Second Collaborative, it is a collaborative between the city, the county, Fort Worth PD, and United Way of Tarrant County through that funding. Program goals here are the same. One point of order that is really interesting to note is Sam, who is our program director, was meeting with the City Grants Department, the City Department, because we're really looking at how do we align all of city funding that is directed at crime efforts, as well as United Way's efforts, to see how we are going to meet this goal as a unit. And not necessarily just 1 Second. We believe that there are some opportunities to align reporting, align what are some capacity building efforts that our grantees may need. So when we look at this goal, it is not a goal just for the 1 Second Collaborative. It is how can we align that across the board throughout the city and the county. Again, updates here as far as we have a steering committee that really guides this work, even though this is under the umbrella of United Way, is really guided by community members, council members, representatives from our PD, representatives from each of our priority zip codes. And although we say priority zip codes, it is all of the city as well as all of Tarrant County, as well as the organizations that you see here, our CBOs, our community-based organizations, nonprofits, either their executive director and or their designee. So again, it is driven by our anchor organizations, which are the funders, and then our community representatives. Sure, Karen.
Sorry, can you just walk us through how those particular assignments were determined, particularly if you go down to the those orange blocks that we see down there at the bottom?
The orange blocks? Okay, so the orange blocks here, the first top are the priority zip codes that were identified through data. And data is not just crime data. We also looked at what we call soft data, such as 211, looking at where are calls most often coming from, whether that's from basic needs, whether that is things such as rental assistance, even mortgage assistance, those looking for utility assistance or other. And then we also looked at communities in schools. We know that communities in schools are identified for particular schools and districts. So we wanted to see where was CIS in those particular campuses. We also looked at Fort Worth ISD, Arlington ISD, Crowley, Everman, HEB areas, and looked at attendance rates, suspension rates, discipline rates. And that's how we drilled down to see how often those particular zip codes showed up in those particular data points. So what we did was we reached out to either that council member for that zip code and or that commissioner and asked that they appoint a representative. They are most often, those individuals are most often knowing who constituents that are calling, who are active, who
Sure.
really want to get involved.
I
Right?
appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I'd be interested to see that data because what I see here, particularly on those lists, is, and I appreciate that some areas experience greater tragedy than others, but I don't think that it captures all of the areas in the city. Specifically, I see 2 members, one from Councilman Flores, 2 from Councilman Bivens, 1 Crane, 2 Nettles, 2 Williams, but there's nothing from District 9 or District 11, which I think I would like to look at that data to justify why those 2 particular communities were left out of this process while other folks received multiple.
Absolutely, and I will also say that although they were not identified as a priority zip code, that there is not a zip code that is left out because there are also some other, and I'll get to some other ways that we're engaging as many people as possible, as many zip codes as possible as well, for that very reason. Because we also know that there's just one factor where another zip code could have been as a priority zip code, and we recognize that. So
Correct.
although when we say that priority, so I will definitely get that information over to you.
Yeah, we need to make sure that it's equitable amongst those of us here on council and the
Absolutely.
communities we represent.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
I do have one question on this slide. And I'm looking at some of the names on here and some of the names that are affiliated with groups that participate in crime, which is great that we have them on here. If they apply for funding, is it going to be an issue that they are on this steering committee?
No, because they were exempt from reviewing any applications or taking part in any of the decision-making. And they knew that also. Matter of fact, that question was asked of some of them before they applied to be on the steering committee to make sure they weren't exempt from funding.
One important distinction might be here too on the zip code. If you look closely, Councilmember Beck, the individual zip codes pertain to the council member, but they're different. So like Councilmember Williams has 2 zip codes that were very problematic. This was probably also done before Councilmember Martinez was here in her district. So this may shift based on her districts. And candidly, it may change, continue to change based on how we focus on these hotspot areas.
76133 is in Council District 9, just so we're all on the same page on that one.
Which zip code, I'm sorry?
76133.
It's split, correct?
It is majority in District 9.
So fair. So I think her point is in 76133, that's actually District 9.
Okay.
Majority. There's a small portion there that is in Council District 6.
Okay.
And probably 04 and 05.
And importantly here, for United Way leadership, that may have shifted during
Right.
redistricting. So as we move forward, we can kind of relook at lines, because it may be in the future that Councilmember Beck or anybody else here at the table may need to be the one making that appointment, or at least working with who's appointed to make sure they feel good about who's there serving their constituents. So we don't expect you to fully keep track of those lines. I know it changes, but.
Yeah, and absolutely. And our steering committee is also meant to be a living steering committee that changes for that very reason, as well as data changes. The more that we learn, we want for this to be representative of where you believe that we need to put our focuses at. So as Sam goes around and has those individual conversations with you, that's exactly what we would like to hear from you. So I'll make sure that he also has this in tow when he comes and meets with you all as well, to get your feedback.
I can verify that. Just a moment, Chris. So this is to the concern that was raised, and I think it's a valid concern. I had my meeting with Sam yesterday, and we talked specifically about making the rounds individual council members so they can get the opportunity to make input into what the committees and, work groups are doing. So that's going to be addressed.
Mhm. Absolutely, thank you. So there was a lot that has been taking place since the contract was signed in December. But I did want to just highlight just a couple of factors of where we are right now. This just takes you through some of that journey. One point I would say is in April, when the applications were drafted and put out for organizations. We had quite a few organizations that reached out to us to say, hey, I heard about the 1 Second Collaborative opportunities for us to get funding to either sustain and or build up the programs that are going to be either addressing in prevention, intervention, suppression, or reentry. So we also know that many of our organizations may not necessarily have the capacity to address all of the factors when you go after federal dollars, because there are so many opportunities for missteps in that particular process. So we offered, actually required a bidders conference for all organizations. If you were going to apply for funding, you must attend that bidders conference so that we could walk you through the process, because ultimately what we wanted for organizations to be successful in the process of applying. So that way we equal that playing field. You'll see.
Question, is there a one-time opportunity for the bidding process, or are you gonna have multiple?
We will, so it's not like the the CCPD funds where it's roving. So we had a phase 1 and we will have a phase 2 later in the fall. So we did close to 2 million that we put out on this first phase, and then we'll have just shy about 850,000 that will be in phase 2. So that'll be a second bidders conference coming up. And we did have several organizations who missed that opportunity that will want to come through this second one.
How did you promote that, that conference?
As far and wide as we could. So we also knew that we don't know everyone.
Right.
So what we did was we put a lot of reliance on the organizations that do the work already. Who do you often refer to? Who do you often talk with? We also went through the schools and asked the social workers, counselors, who do you refer to? We also have a pretty extensive database internally of organizations who apply to United Way. Also talked with Keith Morris, wanted to see who else applies for like CCPD fundings, that type of thing. So a lot of it was, I'm sorry? I promoted it. Yes, ma'am, you did on your Facebook page and all. So it was wherever we could get the word out, but also knowing that's why we left some money for phase 2, because we knew there was no way we were going to get to everyone, and we did hear from some people.
Sure, thank you.
Absolutely. So where we are right now, agreements have been drafted. So after organizations apply, they go through a review process. We have 20 reviewers. That comes from those who have reviewed grant applications before, those who have never looked at a grant application, from all zip codes throughout our county, age range, race, gender, those who know about violence in our communities, and those who may be a little new to it. So those representatives from those different areas reviewed the grants over a couple of weeks, scored, sent them back with their recommendations. Then we had a consensus meeting. During that consensus meeting is where they debated about the organizations. At that time, we were also knew that there were some shootings taking place that we heard of, not all of them because we don't know of everything, that had took place at that time that they were actually even reviewing. So their focus really went towards intervention. What can happen right now if we put dollars on the ground? Knowing that we set aside funding for prevention dollars, we wanted the intervention team, the review panel really wanted to focus on intervention dollars. So those agreements went to the city once those organizations were selected. By virtue of the city contract, we sent all of those agreements to the city for final approval. It did take us a little bit more time than we had anticipated and or hoped. However, the reason for that is every organization is so uniquely different that we wanted to make sure that we crafted their metrics in such a way that they could be successful. However, that it also placed some parameters as far as the impact that we're looking for, the evaluations, and that they understand if you accept this funding, these are the parameters to it and what you are going to have to report to. Capacity building workshops you're going to have to attend. So therefore, it's not just we're going to give you $200,000 and you go out and be great. You are going to be great as a cohort with this phase 1 Ford funding organizations, and United Way will be there with you to be able to provide those capacity building workshops alongside you. So where we are now is those organizations have their agreements. They are due to have them back in our office by Monday, and they are required to attend an onboarding session either Tuesday or Wednesday, where we will review all of the expectations. When are you to report? What does performance look like? What does outcomes look like? Not just outputs, meaning I served 20 kids. We want to know if you served those 20, what was the outcome? What was the impact? They also now, once they submit their agreement, can start drawing down the funding that was allocated. No one gets 100% of their funding. It is all performance-based if they are meeting all of the requirements. If they are not meeting those requirements, because we have so many check-ins through the midway points, we are able to address those at that time. Engagement opportunities, really excited. This kind of really speaks to the fact that we are truly citywide, countywide, regardless of the zip code, is the work groups. Our steering committee members have met and identified the work groups that they would like to focus on during this phase. Work groups will go in eight-week increments. So what you see here are the work groups that they will focus on. What will take place is there will be two co-chairs, a co-chair who is a content expert in one of these work group areas here, the top 6 priorities, as well as a steering committee member or a committee or a community member, which is when Sam is meeting with you all individually, he will be able to have that conversation with you as well if there is a community member that you would like to identify. These work groups will work on SMART goals to establish what are the goals in this particular area. For instance, we know that our young people need mentors. Well, how do we get to that and what does that look like? We want to establish those SMART goals, and that's what the work groups will do over the course of 8 weeks. After 8 weeks, they will get that timeline together. We would come back before this body and present out on the work group the statuses and how we will go forth in that work. As that work continues, they will onboard other priorities in other work groups. And again, it expands the table of the amount of residents, community members that will be able to take part in this work. It's just a little bit more about the work groups here. The Youth Advisory Board and the Multidisciplinary Team are the other 2 areas where community members will be able to get involved. Youth Advisory Board, Roger Fogel, along with a consultant, will be putting together this particular initiative where we're going to be onboarding young people. We can't build this plane without young people taking part in the work. How do we address violence? What are the things that you need? What are the things that we're doing that's just not working? And that's what the Youth Advisory Group will do. The multidisciplinary team will be an opportunity for those who are conducting work, street outreach, boots on the ground, that comes across a young people that needs more than what they can give. You can refer that individual or that family to the multidisciplinary team. And the plan is there is a solution in that room or a resource in that room or someone who can help us find it. I've talked about the decision-making process for our request for applications. Here you will see we made 18 recommendations for Phase 1 funding. There were 11 organizations that were not recommended for Phase 1 funding, but that does not mean that they are out of that pool, that many of them are also considered for Phase 2. We are not yet releasing the names of those organizations because we want to wait until they agree to the terms, which will be on Monday, because they could opt out. They could say, that's too much. I don't want to do that, or that's not enough money for what you're asking for me to do. And so we understand that. So after that deadline on Monday, whatever we don't receive back, we'll reach out to those organizations just to make sure they just didn't miss the date, see how we can assist. Sometimes it's just questions. Sometimes they're just fearful. They just don't know how this is going to work. And we want to really let them know that we're going to walk alongside them with this work. And then once we have all of those together, then we will submit that to you all and also issue a press release and introducing those organizations in this Phase 1 cohort. And that's where we're at.
Thank you, Regina. Questions from council? Chris?
I have a couple of questions. I think you mentioned funds will be released off of performance. And then I think you also mentioned for the requirements that you have for them to, the steps they need to do. What does performance look like? Because, I mean, you could be doing the work, and it takes a little longer for you to actually see change in that community. So what does that look like?
It looks different for every organization just based on what their proposal was based on. For some, it was individual counseling, like through Alliance for Children or Recovery Resource, drug treatment, that type of thing. So performance can look like, are you meeting the metrics that we set forth in your agreement? So if you say that you're going to see 12 young men in that first quarter, one, did you see 12 young men? But we're also looking for, how did you identify those young men? We don't want just any 12 young men, right? So when we work with those organizations, we're actually setting up, how do you identify those that we're actually trying to reach? Because if we're doing intervention dollars, then we're trying to reach those who are right there on the cusp. That's why we didn't do as much in the prevention area, because that's a wider pool, right? That's really all of our young people. And so metrics such as that, how are you identifying? How are you surveying that their lives have changed? Are you pulling attendance records? Are you pulling suspension records? So all of those areas are built into those who are seeing young people as part of their proposal. If it's those who are seeing counseling, a little bit trickier because there's only certain things that they can release, but there are surveys and such that we're looking at for those metrics for performance.
Sure. My other question is, I know in our process for the CCPD funding, a lot of our applicants were having issues with filling out for the grants, not meeting the requirements or not putting it together. And I think one of the things that we tasked United Way with is getting them ready for that process and walking them through. And I know you mentioned it just a little bit. Some of the applicants, much you can talk about, that did not make that process, did not make the funding. Was it because of the grant application did not meet the standard level, or, and how do we fix them and get them ready for the next pool?
Thankfully, we did not use their scores as the only source for decision-making, because that would have thrown out even some of those who got recommended for funding as well. We know many of our organizations that are just doing the work, and they've always done the work, aren't ready to submit a grant application. So our goal is never to hold that piece against them. So we not only looked at their scores, but we also looked at their history of being in this community and doing the work. We also looked at our ability to basically, as we say, grow them up into this process. Are they willing? Are they able? Are they, when they sign this agreement, that's telling us, yes, we will sit with you and actually be able to conduct this work and let us build that capacity. So we didn't use just their scores in order to recommend them for funding.
Okay, last question, I promise. Chief, and I know the other issue was some people that was applying for the CCPD funding were not getting enough funding in order to do the work that they were doing. And so we was hoping that United Way was going to be able to come in and help supplement that funding. Did we come to an agreement that they can receive CCPD funding as well as 1 second collaborative funding?
Yes, there are several programs that have CCPD and 1 second collaborative funding, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council members? No? No. I think that's the last of our questions. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Our next presentation, council, is actually two with Robert Stearns, our Economic Development Director. One is a proposed tax abatement agreement with Siemens, and the next would be a tax abatement agreement with DrinkPack. You can roll right through them, Robert.
All right. Thank you, Mayor, members of council, and Robert Stearns, Economic Development. As the mayor said, we are presenting two proposals for your consideration today, one with Drink Pack and one with Siemens. Before we get started, I would like to recognize our partners at the Economic Development Partnership, Robert Allen. Robert unfortunately couldn't be here. He's still out meeting everyone across the city, but Robert and Sarah were great partners in working on these two projects. And then I also want to especially recognize Cherie Gordon on my staff, who's really done the yeoman's amount of work on coordinating with both of these projects and structuring these deal terms. So, I will do that when I get to their part of the presentation. Thank you. Okay. Are we on? I got nothing up here. That's okay. I got it. Okay. Okay, we're going to Siemens first. All right, so yes, that's all right, we'll roll with it. So we've got Siemens. So as we move into the Siemens presentation, I do want to recognize our guests in the audience from the company, Grant Williams, who we've been working with very closely on the structure, and then Joe Redoff, who is Siemens head real estate guy. I think that's the correct easy way to say it, Joe. So thank you for coming in for this presentation. I think Grant brought some cooler weather to Texas for us, so we appreciate that. So Siemens, as you know, is a German multinational corporation. Really, this is the global market leader in industrial automation and software, annual revenues of over $76 billion. And they have been working for several months now on a multi-state site selection process. And I will state both of these projects are very competitive projects, that this will be the first step in ensuring that Fort Worth is a selected site, but we still have a couple of other approvals that we'll have to work through with them as part of the process. But Siemens is looking to establish an advanced manufacturing plant to produce low voltage switchware and switchboards. And so this is really in consideration of the fact that the switchboard market has really exploded over the last few years. Capacity or demand has really exceeded capacity. And so because of that, and Siemens sees that continuing for the next several years, they have had to look at opportunities to upscale their production capacity to meet that demand. So the proposed project would be here at 7200 Harris Legacy. So this is a site in Carter Park East in Council District 8. The project overview, so again, they would be proposing a capital investment of $133 million as part of the project. $70 million tied to the real property improvements, which would be in place by December 2024, and then another $63 million in personal property in place by January 1st, 2025, when the appraisal district recognizes that placement. We'd have 167 full-time jobs by December 24, ramping up to 715 jobs by December 2026. Again, the annual salary for these jobs is $63,000, and so this kind of continues our focus on attracting higher wage jobs to the city, and then they have our standard commitment to utilization of business equity firms as part of our economic development agreements. So again, just reviewing that capital investment of $133 million, and that job creation, 715 jobs by December 2026, with salaries at $63,000. We are proposing a 10-year tax abatement of up to 70% of the incremental real and business personal property. That's kind of based on, you'll see the commitments there tied to investment, the BEF commitment and job creation. Again, if there is any year during the term of the agreement that the average annual wage is not at $63,000, then they would forfeit that incentive payment for that year, but all other terms would result in a proportional reduction to the amount of dollars that would be abated back to the company. And you can see the overall development summary here. I won't go through all of that. Extend the overall incentive on this project. You see the net present value to the city is about, it's kind of hard to read that from up here, $2.6 million as part of the project. City participation is just under 5%, and we have about a 22-to-1 private to public ratio, so private investment to public dollars involved in the project. So our proposal, our recommendation would be to enter into a 10-year tax abatement for up to 70% of the incremental real and business personal property. Because this is a tax abatement, we have to conduct a public hearing, and because of state regulations, we have to have a 30-day notice requirement for that public hearing, so we would not have the hearing to create the reinvestment zone until September 12th, and then we would also have an M&C for council consideration on that same date for the agreement itself. and I'll answer any questions.
Thank you, Robert. Any questions for him on this deal? Gentlemen, thank you for attending today. We appreciate your presence. Let's move along to Drink Pack.
Okay, as I said, second project is Drink Pack. Again, another project we've been working on that has been a fairly competitive site selection process. Again, looking at sites both within the state and outside the state. Drink Pack is really, one of the leaders. Hold on while we're getting the slide pulled up. Drink Pack is really one of the leaders in beverage production. So they are beverage solutions, comprehensive operational services, including procurement support, batching and processing, storage, and distribution. Okay, thank you. So Drink Pack is currently based out of Santa Clarita, California, approximately 400 employees. And again, as I mentioned, this is one of the most technologically advanced canned beverage facilities in North America. And as you'll see as we go through this presentation, and you note in the following slide, that what we're really focusing on here is the job creation. So we've got 2 additional facilities that are under proposal, 1,000 employees that would be brought to the DFW region. This will be to Fort Worth, obviously. And again, these facilities would include production for energy drinks, hard seltzer, canned cocktails, alternative dairy beverages, et cetera. So the Phase 1 location is a Tramelco site at 35 Eagle up in Denton County. You see the location outlined in the map here. And then the Phase 2 location, again, will be another development in Carter Park East in Council District 8. So this will be down at Oak Grove Road. So again, establishing those 2 locations, their proposed investment in both locations will comprise about $452 million. Phase 1, which essentially would be the Trammell Crow side, is proposing about $37 million in real property improvements by December 2026 and $183 million in BPP by 2027. Phase 2, which essentially is the Carter Park site, $32 million in real property improvements and $200 million in BPP. Again, 1,000 full-time jobs split between the 2 facilities, 550 at the Trammell Crow site, 450 at the Carter Park East site, with average annual salaries of $70,000 for these positions. And so again, having a beverage producer, a beverage manufacturer that is creating high-paying jobs, it's really what attracted us to try to bring this project to Fort Worth. So similar to Siemens, we're proposing a 10-year tax abatement. This will be on 70% of the incremental real and business personal property. Again, the forfeiture of the abatement if they don't hit their salary requirements of $70,000. And again, on the way that, because there's 2 phases of this project, they would be able to earn a 50% abatement if they only did one. But again, that is not the intent of the project. They are fully intending to move forward with both sites. And so that would get us to the 70% over the 10 years. So again, the development summary, $450 million in capital improvement, 1,000 new jobs at 70,000 annual wages. Estimated benefit to the company is about $21 million. City participation just under 5% again, just under 22 to 1 private to public ratio, and the city should gross just under $9 million as part of the development. And so again, same process for Siemens. We have a 30-day notice requirement to create a public hearing to create the reinvestment zone, and so this will be on the September 12th agenda for the reinvestment zone and the M&C for approval. And I'll answer any questions you all have.
Thank you, Robert. Any questions on this incentive? Great work, Robert, and to your team. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Council will move to the next presentation, a presentation on banner policy. William Johnson, Assistant City Manager, and Melinda Ramos, Deputy City Attorney, will be conducting the presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Just wanted to kick this presentation off. As you recall, before the summer break, we committed to come back to City Council with some recommendations on improvements in our overall banner policy. The policy has not been updated since the 1990s, I want to say. And so it's well overdue. As you recall, there were a few issues with some applicants that came forward to utilize our downtown street banners when there was going to be a very small, relatively small event It's going to take place for about 3 hours. And we just wanted to make sure that we were being clear in working with our partners, nonprofits that are assisting with managing the policy on our behalf under contract. We want to continue those relationships, provide some more clarity. And I just want to take a moment to thank Melinda Ramos and the Law Department for their hard work, along with our TPW team, Michael Owens, Martin Phillips, Lauren Preer, and her team in working on the updates to this policy. So with that, I'll turn it over to Melinda.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Melinda Ramos, Deputy City Attorney. As William said, we're going to be going over some proposed changes for your consideration for the street banner policy. As William said, this policy was first adopted in 1998, governing the placement of banners in the right-of-way, and has not been updated significantly since then. So the policy does allow for agreements with nonprofits, as William mentioned. Sorry, forgot to advance it. We currently have 4 agreements in place with nonprofit organizations. Downtown Fort Worth Inc. in PIDs 1 and 14, Camp Bowie District for PID 19, Arts De La Rosa, and the Stockyards Business Association. This next slide lays out exactly where those banners are with those particular 4 nonprofits that they manage. For the Stockyards Business Association and Arts De La Rosa, theirs stretch from North Main, from 23rd Street to 28th Street and Clinton Avenue to Packers, and then from North Main Street to Northside Drive and Northeast 23rd Street. And then for Camp Bowie, it stretches all the way from the Cultural District all the way down to 820. So the purpose for bringing this forward to you all into revising the policy is to explain what banners can be displayed on street lights and poles and over the streets, to make clear that these are poles that are owned and operated and maintained by TPW, that banners do not constitute a public forum, and to kind of really use this to focus the purpose of these banners, which is to announce and promote community events, cultural events, education, and civic events and information. So some changes to the banner policy that are being proposed are to add the overhead banners to the policy. Currently, they are in a standalone document by themselves. Currently, there's only one overhead banner that goes over 7th Street as you exit downtown and enter into the West 7th area. To remove some on-site, off-site distinctions that are currently in the policy, and those are related to whether or not a nonprofit is contiguous to the street poles or not. To continue the special agreements with nonprofits to run the program, but to update how those are going to be managed by those groups. To update specifications in the maintenance, changes to duration and removal, to add some specific definitions that were lacking in our current policy, and a change in the fee structure since those haven't been changed since 1998 as well. So these are just the elements of the new policy. It contains everything that goes into a policy, the purpose, the definitions, where it's allowed, where not allowed, reservations, fees, insurance, hold harmless, what has to be included in the application, and what happens when a permit is denied and where they can appeal. Currently, our current policy does allow for an appeal of a denial of a banner. However, the appeal is to a council committee that no longer exists, that was in existence in '98 but no longer. So under the current policy, there's no defined definition of event. What there are examples in the policy. So the current policy states that nonprofits may use banners to promote their organization or events or exhibits held in the city. Some examples provided in the policy of what events are, to go back, it needs to be open to the public, of common interest, and recognize or contribute to the cultural fabric of the city. Some examples are as listed on the slide. Public concerts, sports events, entertainment, education-related activities. So what is being proposed is to have a more defined, specific definition of what an event is and define it as something that's of significant interest to a portion of the residents of the city. Of course, it would still include cultural, civic, or major events. Kind of the examples are the same as what were provided previously in the current policy: art shows, concerts, festivals, that would be of broad interest to either residents or tourists, which would benefit the city, a government agency, generate significant tax revenue, and basically benefit the residents of the city. So what would be allowed under the proposed policy would be events hosted by the city, sponsored or co-sponsored by the city, events which support or attract tourism, events being held at the Convention Center, Will Rogers, Dickies Arena, and major colleges and universities. Welcome messages for those attending conventions, conferences, and other citywide events. Promoting public improvement districts or other particular districts by the city as decided by the city council, and promoting our educational institutions all the way from higher education to elementary schools. What would be disallowed under the policy is the promotion of commercial advertising, messages with the political, religious, or public issue advertising, profane language or personal attacks, those that promote discrimination, those that advocate for illegal activity, messages that are infringe upon a copyright, those messages that can compromise safety or security of proceedings, those banners that could create a traffic hazard based on the language that's used on them, stop, look, danger, and any other banners that would violate local, state, or federal law. So with regard to the duration, okay. This would change to a first come, first served priority in order. So the first priority would be city-hosted events, followed by events hosted by a tourism entity. Tourism entities include Visit Fort Worth, Chambers of Commerce, and others as defined. Events sponsored by the city but organized or managed by a nonprofit. Duration would change to be limited to 14 days prior to the event. The current policy allows displays 6 weeks prior to the event. Banners that don't promote a date-specific event would be allowed for 3 months, 90 days, but additional time could be requested as allowed by the TPW director. So the following are the fees for the proposed new fees for the banner program. So the program fee that actually is at $100. Must be touching something, Patricia. The fees would go to $100. As you see on the screen, the fees would go for $25 per poll for 2-week period, $50 per poll for 2-week period. The overhead banner program fee would be at $100 and the flat fee of $50 per 2 weeks. As I stated before, we would continue the special agreements that we have with the 4 partners that we currently have. What would change with regard to the contracts that we have with them is that right now these organizations have the ability to keep all of the fees and to approve the banners themselves. So final approval would shift now, or is being proposed to shift now to the TPW director, and that the city would retain a percentage of the fees collected for those banners. This is just more information about changes to the installation and maintenance. So it would be by a contractor licensed by the city and bonded to work in our right-of-way. The banners would be required to be removed by the date stated in the permit that would be issued, or if not removed within 7 days of that date, TPW would remove the banners and charge the applicant for the cost. The responsibility to maintain those banners is up to the applicant, and the removal of the banners would be required if they're going to be damaged in any way that would cause injury or a traffic hazard. Changes to the application process would be to allow, to limit application to at least 90 days before the reservation date. Currently, folks can apply for a banner at least a year in advance of when they want to use the banner. Like with all other applications that the city has, there would be a laundry list of items that would need to be submitted as part of that application, including a traffic control plan, insurance requirements, to provide a sample of the banner and the content, and identify any kind of sponsorship logo that they intend to put on the banner, but it would be limited to the bottom 10% of the overall size of the banner. Now, with regard to approval and denial of the permit, Approval would be the sole authority of the TPW director to approve the design, the content, location, and installation dates. Review and approval is proposed to be within 10 days of the date of submission. If the application is denied, it can be appealed to the city manager for a final determination. The appeal has to be received within 5 business days of denial by the TPW director. And this is the criteria that the city manager would use to determine whether or not to uphold the decision of the TPW director or to grant the permit. So whether the banner meets the criteria that's listed under the allowable displays, whether it's likely to promote tourism or a local event, provide under the allowed usage that is provided earlier, or is of a great interest to a majority of the residents, whether the banner seeks the same time slot as someone else requesting, what's the priority of approval, who has the higher priority essentially, and any other kind of lawful basis that they could use for the determination. That's kind of really the proposed banner policy in a nutshell, and I'll be happy, and William would be happy to take any questions that you all have.
Gina, go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
I like the presentation, but I would like to have further discussion on the fees to make sure that it's enough money to allow for the registration that we talked about previously, identifying them. So could we hold off on that?
Okay. Does that make sense to you, Melinda?
I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem, specifically for the fees, what did you want staff to consider?
Holding off to make sure the fees are enough to get proper registration that we've talked about before. Whether it's an ID badge or the company.
Oh, this is
Oh,
different.
this is different,
This is
yes,
just
than the
for-
door-to-door. This is
Yeah.
strictly as it relates to our street banners.
Yeah.
No wonder.
Jeanette, you're next.
No wonder.
Not that this would ever happen, but what if there was a group who mounted flags on these poles without, going through the process?
TPW takes them down, I'm assuming?
Okay.
Yeah.
Could we
quickly.
fee them too? Should that be included?
Is there a process by which to find someone that doesn't have authorized use? No, Dana says no, not worth the time. Just doesn't happen. It's pretty involved. It's not something you can do very easily without somebody knowing. Macy?
My question was about the schedule of fees. Do you have a proposed schedule of fees and how much the city would take in? Is it by district or by the amount?
So I would defer to William on what they were contemplating in terms of, when you're referring to the agreements that we have with the 4 organizations to
Yes,
manage
so
our
I know
banners.
like Campbell District currently does
Right.
not pay any fees or fees back to the city. So what percentage
Right,
would the city?
I'll defer to William on that.
Thank you.
We're thinking about a 90-10 split. No, just kidding. Really, our cost is what all that we're looking to cover. And in most cases where the third parties are doing most of the work, our only main risk is going to be related to the security deposit. If there's something that we have to go out and take care of, then we would utilize that security deposit to reimburse ourselves for our costs. So we're primarily looking to cover our costs. There may be some minor costs associated with the review process internally, but the third parties are doing the majority of the work, so.
Does that answer your question, Macy? Not really.
Not really.
Not really.
Could we get
We
a,
don't-
do you have an
we don't-
idea of, do these fees cover the city's cost, I guess?
These fees have been increased over the 1998 levels. And so there should be no negative impact compared to what those third parties are collecting today based on the new fee schedule, if that answers your question.
Can we get a copy of the fee schedule? Or I'm looking for the percentage that we're gonna take from the fees
Right,
from
so,
the districts.
so we'll have to go through and calculate what it would be on a percentage basis, but we need some time to experience what our costs are gonna be. But we don't anticipate them being more than, we haven't been receiving any funds, right? And so now there's just gonna be an additional approval step that we'll be more actively involved in, and it should be very minimal compared to what's been collected. The fees have been increased over what's been collected, so I don't see them losing any funding based on current levels, if that answers your
That
question.
does, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Charlie, then Gina.
Hopefully mine's not as complicated. Since we still have this slide up, I just want to make a correction for anyone who might be depending on the closed captioning. You'd said $50 per 2-week period, but that's the $500 per 2-week period, so just want to notate that. As far as the application process goes, will that also involve proof that they have a venue large enough that has what we'd consider, I guess, large impact?
I mean, yeah, they'll have to provide information related to their event, the location, the time.
And show like proof, like it's actually reserved and deposit made? Okay.
Yeah.
Gina.
Let the record state, I tell you to go for it. Let the record state that whatever agreement Councilmember Hill comes up with, I will fiercely support and defend. That's it.
Got it. Alan.
Thank you. Question not about the policy, but general maintenance of the banners. When they become damaged, what's the process? How is it identified and how is it taken care of?
I can't speak to what currently occurs. What I can speak to, what is being proposed is that if the banner is damaged, then the contact will be made with the applicant to repair their banner within a set period of time. If they don't repair it within that set period of time, then TPW will be authorized to remove the banner and essentially keep whatever is determined to be either the program fee or the security deposit to cover the cost for TPW actually removing the banner.
Any other questions, council? If not, thank you very much, both of you, for the presentation. Okay, our last update is an update on the future City Hall. Dana Bergdorf is going to kick it off and then turn it over to Tanyan.
All right, thank you, Mayor and members of City Council. We're excited to bring you this update on our future home, our future City Hall. A couple of good news items. One of them you're already aware of. We're just celebrating the fact that we got our federal permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for the new construction of our future council chambers and parking extension and other site work. So I do want to acknowledge and thank Tanyan Farley and the Athenian Group and all of his team for their yeoman's effort. I think they first applied in last July of 2022, but had been working on it for many months leading up to that. So it was a long, arduous process, and we're glad to have that moved forward. So Tanya will have a number of updates for you, including schedule. The other piece, though, that I wanted to give kudos for is that we got a request about a month ago from our tenant on the 19th floor of Future City Hall. If you may recall, when we bought the building, we had tenants in floors 15 through 20, and there's been some atrophy, if you will, some folks who've moved out for COVID or other business reasons. And so we have tenants moving out this fall from 16 and 17, and then we had 2 remaining floors left, 18 and 19. And so we heard from the 19th floor tenant that due to some business decisions that they needed to move out prior to their 2029 lease termination. So it was quite a surprise to us. So I want to give kudos to our property management team, Ricky Salazar, and also Greg Wingate, who worked very well to come up with a fair early termination settlement, if you will, that will come before you on August 22nd. So that enables some moves within the tower that Tanyan will cover as well. And so our goal, just so you know for the record, is that we want to try to keep our project costs the same, even though we're expanding into this new floor, some of these new floors sooner than we thought we would. So that's our goal, and we're gonna work towards that. All right, so Tanyan, come on up, thanks.
All right, thank you, Dana, appreciate it. Pleasure to be in front of you again today. Mayor and Council, thank you as always for your time. I know I'm the last presentation of the day, so I will try and go through this as expeditiously as possible so you can move on to your next activities. I am here with our normal quarterly update. As Dana mentioned, obviously we have some very exciting news to share this time around. I'm happy to be here with our permit in hand. I want to thank once again, as Dana mentioned, not only the Athenian Group team. I want to thank DJ Harrell and the Development Services Group at City of Fort Worth for all their work to be able to review the permits and other items ahead of the 408 process to make sure that once we got their 408 permit that we were able to move forward. And I really want to give a thank you to Greg Wingate and interim property management director Ricky Salazar on their work on the 19th floor as well, because that is not an easy process to get through, especially with the municipality, and they did a great job of coming to what I think is a really fair recommendation in a quick period of time. So kudos to them. All right, with that, jumping into our presentation for today, project updates. We're going to talk a little about our employee staff management forum, food and beverage program update, and then some final thoughts and questions. For those of you that are new to mayor and council, you know that this is my favorite slide. This was the goals for the Future City Hall program that we put together over the course of about 6 months in partnership with city staff, city leadership, elected officials, public, and many of the support agencies in the city of Fort Worth and surrounding areas that really will help make this building your future home. So just to review those, I think it's important we level set every meeting. We really wanted to create an inclusive and engaging public space, bring more people to the building than we had traditionally, and make it feel like a community location. Maintain the Class A look and feel. It is a beautiful building today. It is a 20-year-old building today, so there are some things we have to do to keep it Class A, make it safe, make it inviting, and make it welcoming. Create efficient, equitable, and flexible workspaces. We know that the city grows and changes all the time, and we want to make sure that we can support that, that we create equitable workspaces for staff across departments, regardless of their division, making sure that they're in the same types of spaces for the same type of functional roles. Sustainable and cost-efficient building. Obviously, we've done a lot of work to bring as much of that into the building as we can, as well as the new building, the site itself. Transformational delivery of city services. You have a couple things there. Number one, our community service floor that will have our development services, water bill pay, a number of other functions, as well as bringing together 23 departments from across 13 city buildings into one facility to better serve the public and ultimately drive the vision for the next 50 years. We've been in this building close to that now, and obviously we want to make sure we design to grow into that facility. So with that being said, let's talk about kind of where we're at. So as Dana mentioned, we are working with y'all and with the city on the 19th floor lease to come available this fall rather than 2029. With that happening, we do have a planned restack of the building. For those of you that have heard me say this before, these projects are like a Rubik's Cube, but when we finally solve the Rubik's Cube, y'all move the stickers around, and that's okay because we're going to find a great way to continue to move forward. So with that, the 19th floor is going to go, plan to go to our law department. It puts them really close to mayor and council and provides for some good space for them to use that functionally aligns with their way of work. As Dana mentioned, we're looking to not add costs for this add to the program, so we need to find a space that best fits their current way of work and future way of work with minimal update costs. The 18th floor is currently tenant occupied and will be through really summer of 2025. At the future date, we do have plans for departments that could relocate to that floor. We're potentially looking at diversity, inclusion, and economic development relocating to that floor as they continue to grow with some of the great things the city is doing. The 17th floor and 16th floor will be occupied mostly by the water department, with one of the suites occupying diversity, inclusion, and a suite that is larger than what was planned before and allow them to continue to do the great work they're doing. 15, HR and Office of Police Oversight Monitor. 14 is our CMO, Economic Development, and the newly minted Fort Worth Lab Group. I think that creates a great opportunity for the CMO to work really closely with the lab on some of the innovative things we're doing. Finance and purchasing consolidated together on 12 with some of the things that purchasing is doing to drive innovation in their work. 11 is TPW. 10 will be really kind of a hallmark floor for what this program was meant to be, which was to bring groups that work together in the same facility. So obviously property management and public events have a lot of great work they do together. We're so excited about what we can do with that floor. Neighborhood services and PARD, similar situation, a lot of cohesive work on 9. 8 is our data center floor, so IT makes sense to go there. 7 is another collaborative floor with CSO, City Secretary, Library Development Collaboration Spaces, and then 6 and 5 being our one-stop shop experience. So a lot of really good things happening there. The main thing we like about this is this provides the best flexibility for city growth, for your departments to expand, as well as groups to move between floors. And then ultimately, our first group up is obviously y'all with mayor and council, and that is on track to take place just after the holidays. So I was up there this morning. We're making great progress. We're excited for y'all to see that and get you in the building. Now with that, I would like to show an update of what that 20th floor looks like. So in July, when I sent out an update to the group, you can see some of the framing that otherwise is being done on 20. As of last week, you can see in the top right here, you're seeing actually Mayor Parker's future office here with some of the built-ins there. And then you can see the planned work cafe where we'll be able to bring members of the public, folks you're working with, your district directors, and otherwise, lots of natural light coming into this space. And I'm really excited to give you those spaces so that when the public comes to visit and work with you, you have a really great space to interact with them and better the community. So that's an exciting update, but I do have one update that is more exciting that we're gonna pull over here, Patricia. And I'm breaking my number one rule, which is never showing a video in a presentation, but we're gonna do it anyways. All right, so this was taken yesterday morning via drone of our site. So that's actually David Cook driving the backhoe right there. No, we've made, obviously, thank you to our friends at TRWD and the Corps of Engineers for helping us through this process, and we're excited to be making progress. So what you're seeing here is we received our permit on July 25th. Since then, the group has obviously mobilized quite quickly to start initial site grading with really a focus on phase one, which is the actual building pad, which you're seeing just up here, which will be connected to our future building. At the end of this month, you'll start to see the pier drilling and that next steps happening, so some exciting things there. Then it will be several weeks of hard work on getting the site pad prepped and ready, and some of the superstructure and or kind of building where you start to come out of the ground will happen in November. So as these things start to move, it's going to be an exciting time. As with construction, it's going to look like this from the outside for a while as we get all the foundational components, utilities, and otherwise right, but we will continue to provide updates here on a monthly basis on progress. With this tracking now to be complete for the first council meeting in winter 24-25. So obviously we've had some significant delays from the Corps of Engineers, but the team is ready to go. And as we continue to move closer to that date and we talk about the first council meeting, we'll make sure we communicate that. But exciting progress. We'll continue to have these videos and pictures along the way. Wow, seamless. Great job. Thank you. All right. So on that front, I also want to talk about with progress. Obviously, there's been a lot of work on this program to make sure we include a lot of different groups in the community that had been traditionally included on projects like this with the city. I want to thank Gwen and Christina from the Diversity and Inclusion Department for really being champions for the business equity program for the city and working really closely with us on this program, as well as Lynn Beck and our architecture team at Boca Powell for really working to find creative ways to break up packages to make it more digestible for smaller groups to be involved in this program. So at current date, obviously different contracts are at different stages. The Athenian contract down here is obviously heading towards the end as we move into heavy construction and really see the project through. We are obviously a minority-owned vendor, local certified, so we're tracking above goal. CMAR, with our Lynn Beck contract, they're only about 10% complete as of the end of July, and that's because we got the permit and that component. So a lot of that work is now going to ramp up. But you can see they're just below their business equity goal already, and I can tell you we're tracking above that at this point, which is very exciting. And our A&E group is tracking right on schedule. They're actually tracking to be just above, and a lot of their work is heading towards completion as well. The remaining percentage here is really going to be on the final design of the new parking garage with our permit. So that's where all those dollars are going to go. And our two main groups to support that are both business equity certified with the city of Fort Worth. So we're tracking at a good pace there. The other thing I really like about what we've done on this project is you can see a number of different types of groups included on this project. I have worked on projects across the country where MWBE spend is really just a percentage of spend with those groups. I think the group here at City of Fort Worth has done a great job of trying to make sure we include a number of groups within the community, and we'll continue to do so throughout. As I mentioned before, if there are groups that you feel should be involved in this program, we're more than welcome to send them, more than happy to send them the upcoming bid list. Diversity and Inclusion publishes that on a monthly basis, and we're happy to provide you with that as well. All right, so things that you'll see on the City of Fort Worth social media and website upcoming. This is Greg Wingate that I mentioned earlier. This is our building manager today. He also happens to be the star of a few of our public communications videos, as well as a number of other city staff that have volunteered and participated. So over the next really 16 months or so, We'll be rolling out a number of communication videos, working with Renee and his group on public comms to make sure we're informing our public about the benefits, updates, et cetera, that are coming with the building, but also as we move towards actually moving people into the facility, where they're going to go to pay their water bill, where they're going to go to get a permit, the functional components that they look for. And so we'll be rolling those out over the next couple months, but lots of things to bring up and film there. If there are things that you think are important to your district or otherwise, please reach out to me and we can make sure we incorporate that in our communication plan going forward. For those of you that haven't yet met in current room 376 or current room 380, we have installed the new AV video conferencing gear that we plan to use at the future building, and we did that for a couple of reasons. Number one, we want you all to have the ability to test and use the future equipment to make sure that you understand how to use it. If there's kinks in it, that we can work it out ahead of time, but also so that when we have folks in from the community or otherwise, we can test the plan to make it easier for them to connect and share going forward. And so I continue to work with y'all on this. If you have questions, feedback, let me know, but we're excited about what we're doing with these rooms and a preview of what's to come in the new facility. This October, we'll be hosting a management forum for supervisors and above when it comes to city leadership in partnership with HR, the CMO group, and a number of other departments at the city to really help answer one key question that David Cook posed to us at the beginning of the project, which is how are we going to work differently? So we've done a lot of work to set that up facility-wise, technology-wise, et cetera, but it is now time to work with the departments on how we're going to actually fundamentally make those changes come to light. So we'll have a series of activities between now and that October forum, including additional programs prior to move-in for those groups that talk about best practices for these facilities. We're going to bring in guest speakers that have been through this transition, and we're going to help inform those frontline managers that are helping to lead that change on tools and techniques to really help maximize it. So a lot of exciting things to come on this. I think that's the key to making sure that this engine continues to move in the right direction, and so thank you to the HR group for really helping to pull that together. From a food and beverage perspective, as you know, the existing building has a cafeteria that looks something like this. This is obviously kind of covered for updates at that point in time, but we are planning to bring that cafeteria to life as a part of this program. With staff moving in significantly prior to the completion of the council chambers due to some of the permitting delays, we will be looking at an interim food and beverage plan to make sure we can support the staff that are there while the council chamber completes prior to this cafeteria opening up. If you don't know the floor plan of the building, the bottom half of this cafeteria actually connects to where the new council chamber of the building is going to be. So it's not the most advantageous place to have a cafeteria during construction. And so we're going to find a way to support this in an interim capacity. I want to thank Michael Crum from Public Events. He's done a great job of helping to kind of spearhead this program for the city. But right now, there's a number of pieces that we're looking at as an interim food and beverage option from the time mayor and council move in until the new cafeteria stood up, which includes daily subscription programs. So many of you have seen this before, but pizza day, taco delivery day, et cetera, and something that is pre-ordered by departments or otherwise, and kind of creates a fun collaborative activity as well as answers the food and beverage question. Food truck program, as many of you know, for the future building, we're planning to have an area for food trucks or otherwise to be outside the chambers. But in the interim, we'll find a location for them on site. And that's something that we'll work on the program for that, a temporary coffee vendor in the facility, and then enhanced grab-and-go capabilities, sandwiches, salads, reheatables, et cetera. For those of you that have been to an airport recently, you know that the vending machines have gone from chips and soda to now having full-on salads, sandwiches, and meals. And it's really cool, some of the technology that's out there, and so we want to find a way to include an interim plan while we work through this. All right, so upcoming key events. So our moving vendor is the last vendor to really come on board in this program that we haven't got on board. We're completing that solicitation now in partnership with the city's purchasing department, and we hope to have that group on board by the end of August. The department lunch and learns, so the prep sessions for the management forum with supervisors will take place the second week of September, and then our management forum will be in October. The new security system will be commissioned in October, and that's really to make sure that the cameras, access controls, all the things that make a city hall safe are set up and commissioned before anyone moves in the building. And then finally, the mayor and council move just after the holidays at the end of this year, which we're very excited about and excited to get y'all in the building. So I think I got through that in enough time to give y'all some time for questions before you got a break for the public session tonight.
Questions from council? Elizabeth?
David, I took note that there's 6 floors difference between us and you. And so I just want you to know I can use the exercise. So if there was any attempt to keep us from popping in, I don't think that's going to work. Can you tell us when, I saw where mayor and council are moving in, but when is the CMO hall moving in and the other departments?
Yes, so the rest of the departments will phase in kind of on a month-by-month basis out through really the better part of 2024, with most of those being in by the end of calendar Q2 of '24. There may be a few with some of the new floors that lag, but we're getting them in as fast as we can just after that.
So 6 months-ish total
Total,
to move everybody.
correct.
When does CMO move over?
CMO is currently slated to go as soon as they can after y'all. There are a few redesigns that are happening because of the 19th floor. So the law department was on 14 prior to this change. We're making some changes to accommodate lab. That takes about 2 weeks to redesign and 6 weeks to bid. So there will be a small delay, but they should be just after y'all.
Okay, great. As we move through this process, what are we doing to invite the community into City Hall? I mean, it's a beautiful new Class A office space building, but talk about what that community looks like as we're moving to and settling into that home.
Sure, great question. And this is candidly a delicate balance of bringing the community into a building that's under full construction and making sure that we can make it a safe and welcoming environment for them. So we're going to continue to, evaluate that at each stage of the program. Obviously, as we move towards the council facility being complete, all of the departments will be in the building, and we're going to work together with y'all and city staff to bring folks into the facility. But over the next, 6 or so months, 8 or so months, as we move folks in the building, we're going to try and minimize the public in the building to try and maximize our speed of getting in the building and keep it safe.
Okay, 2 more questions. The move, right, as we transition to where we, where our constituents meet with us, where we hold our council meetings, what plan do we have? What does that communication strategy look like to make sure that we are letting Fort Worth know that the move is coming, what to expect? I mean, because that's a huge shift.
Huge shift, yes, correct, agreed. And so there's a number of pieces that help that, right? One of the first things is working with Renee and his team on the public communications group to make sure we get information out about the who, the what, and the when those changes are coming, and we'll work with y'all to make sure we get that out to your districts groups. The second thing we're doing is working with the TPW group on some of the signage changes that have to happen to actually physically redirect to this facility. And then third is continued communication. I can tell you from doing this a number of times that no matter what programs are put in place and no matter how much you communicate to folks, there will be people showing up to this facility 10 years from now asking where the mayor is, just
Sure.
the way it is.
PD can direct them to our new home.
Yes, yes.
Once the food court is operational, what's our plan for what that looks like in a permanent setting?
That is a great question that we are still working through with Michael Crum and the subcommittee that's focusing on that from the city staff. And so there's a number of options that are being evaluated, and we're working with purchasing a law right now on what the best way to get vendors selected and on board would be. But the thought would be to bring together some recognizable brands as well as some local concepts in a capacity that allows for an affordable option for the folks attending the building or working in the building, but also in a capacity that keeps it interesting long enough so it doesn't go vacant.
I just want to reiterate, I think that this is a really great opportunity to work with economic development and our chambers to highlight and support, promote local businesses. So to the extent that we can use this space to do that, I want to urge you to continue to look at those options. Big names are great, but I'd rather support and foster some homegrown folks here.
Sure, understood.
Thank you.
Questions, Carlos?
What about the gym?
Excellent.
When are we going to use that? I've been asking that for a while. Just, it seems rather lonely there. I know I can use some work there.
So, so the gym is, in a great state today at the facility. We're working through the final plan with PARD and property management on how that's going to be managed and when it will become operational. But at this point in time, the facility is ready to be used. It's just really a matter of when we want to let folks start using the facility. As I mentioned, the key gatekeeper to really activating the building as a whole is completing the security system changeover. So we have true access control. Right now, there's 3 different access control systems in the tower, and I can tell you it is a nightmare for our current staff to try and manage. We're trying to get that changed over as soon as possible.
So in the meantime, we do use stairs to visit.
There you go. We got a nice sidewalk around the site. You can walk around and check the views, so yeah.
Gotcha.
Any other questions from council? Thank you, Tanya, for the
Cool,
updates.
thank you.
Appreciate it. Council, that's the conclusion of our presentations. Any future agenda items? Chris?
I need an IR on the forward police car chase policy in the situations the officers pursue vehicles.
Gina?
Yeah, I'd like to get a report on, we've made a lot of success in zoning and the way we're notifying the public. And I think that needs to be shared. I'd like to have a presentation, with an IR on that. And I think that'll make a few people happy, including Bob Willoughby, because there are some positive changes. The other thing that I'd like is, this idea came from our Stop 6 collaboration meeting. I'd like to get a presentation that staff will have to partner with Fort Worth Housing Solutions on what we call the one-stop data sharing possibility. Yeah, David knows what I'm talking about. We're looking at ways to make things easy for people who might rely on public housing and keep them from running all over town, getting the certifications and whatever they need. And so I know the city manager can elaborate on that to make sure staff gets it. And the other thing, this takes me back to a request I made maybe 3 or 4 months ago. And staff should know I have not forgotten. I do want to get a report on the geographic aspect of handling zoning cases. I know the city secretary finished her part. I think it's now in DJ's office. And for those who don't remember, this is so that when people come up to speak on zoning cases, we've got technology in place that lets us know on the dais where they live. Because you have people coming from Dallas and Houston speaking on zoning cases, and you don't really know where they live because they might use a local business address. And so staff is able to do that, and I'm waiting for it. I'm getting kind of tired of waiting.
Thank you, Gina. Any other agenda items, council? No? With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.